It's Thursday, and joining me today for Worldview with Denis Campbell is Denis Campbell, editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, also host of Worldview Show on YouTube, youtube.com/Worldview Show. So, Denis, we have a new Pope, Pope Francis, of course, formerly Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina, my home country. Even though I'm an Argentinian Jew, I was getting people congratulating me about the new Pope. I wasn't really sure how to react, and I was actually thinking, are there any implications at all for me about this? And I thought, well, to the extent that it brings attention to Latin America, I guess it could be a positive thing, but otherwise I wasn't particularly moved. More broadly speaking, though, what does this mean, if anything, for the Catholic Church?
Well, it has brought to light one issue that I think is going to get a little bit more airing, although it appears as though Bergoglio was on a slightly different tack, and that was the very cozy relationship that the church had with a rather ruthless Argentinian government in the late 70s and early 80s that went about disappearing some 30,000 people. Now, it has been reported in a couple of different sources that he was, instrumental in hiding people and keeping them safe from harm. But it does also play into, other regimes. For example, we wouldn't even have a Vatican were it not for Mussolini separating it out as a country in exchange for the church looking the other way during World War II. So there's a lot still to be learned about this new pope.
Right, and then as a counter to what you said about hiding people in Argentina, back in 2005, before the conclave that elected Cardinal Ratzinger, in which Bergoglio finished second, there was a human rights lawyer who actually filed a criminal complaint saying he was complicit in the 1976 kidnappings of two priests by the Argentina military dictatorship. So conflicting information there for sure. Talk a little bit about...
Yeah, at the very least, it's always been this very strange shroud over this church. I mean, whether it's on financial sides with the Vatican bank ties to organized crime or to others, I mean, it is something that they really need to conduct themselves much differently moving forward.
I mean, I think at this point, some of the main concerns that obviously people think about when we talk about the Catholic Church are child molestation, position on equality, right, gay rights, and position on birth control. Certainly on equality and on birth control, there's really no indication that we have anything but the status quo here. On child molestation, from the research I've done, this particular cardinal was not on the list of the, I guess we could say, the most acutely known perverts of the Catholic Church, but not being on that list, I don't know how much that really means.
I'm not sure either, to be honest, David. I mean, if you look at also the other cardinal from Argentina who finished third in the balloting in 2005, if I remember correctly, he was, that particular cardinal was very much involved in the administration day-to-day of the Vatican. So I think his hands were a little bit dirtier than Bergoglio's, the now Pope Francis. I just don't see major changes, but the one silver lining in all of this is the fact that that this particular cardinal comes from the Jesuit order. And I'm not Catholic myself. Full disclosure, our family was at a very young age, and we left the church and moved over to the Episcopalian or Anglican church, and I've not been practicing for a number of years. What I do find is that there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy when it comes to these particular areas. And although he may not have a history or may not be on the list, he is now in possession of the papal report that was given to Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, before he resigned.
Right.
And what he does with it will be very important. It's why I'm surprised, quite frankly, that they didn't go for, say, an American like Sean O'Malley. I don't think Dolan ever had a chance. He was a bit too bombastic. But O'Malley is the one who's navigated his way through and done an admirable job of settling and taking care of many of the abuse cases that happened in the Boston Archdiocese.
Right. I had this completely unrealistic fantasy when I was watching, the proceedings yesterday when the curtain started moving, so to speak, in the Vatican. Imagine if he came out and said, right away, the child abuse ends today. But it's completely unrealistic to think that there's going to be anything even remotely that bold, right?
Well, I think because it's so insidious and it's such a deep and interconnected web touching so many people, and I use that word very carefully, it is almost unrealistic. I mean, we had a guest on our show, and he's coming back next week, Dr. Britt Minshall, he came out with something very, very interesting, talking about the expectations of the one area, which is celibacy. And to take a bunch of very, very young men, put them in seminary in their early 20s at the height of their sexuality, and expect that they're not going to act on that is unrealistic, just as it is 40 years later to say you were bad 40 years ago, or maybe in some instances, in many instances, you are still misbehaving.
Right.
I mean, there's so much that's been swept under the rug, and I thought that the real affront was to see the Los Angeles Cardinal Mahoney there as part of the entire proceedings.
Absolutely.
That was the height of hypocrisy.
I actually have a friend who left the Catholic Church but was in seminary at one point. I won't say which one in the country just because, just to maintain privacy, but he said not only was nobody there celibate, 80% of his colleagues or classmates were gay. And that it's just completely unsurprising to anybody within the Catholic Church that's just the reality of the situation. But there's that which is perfectly fine. However, publicly we have this incredible anti-gay stance, and the third thing we didn't touch on yet, which is birth control. So many people in developing nations not using birth control specifically because the Catholic Church is against it, and the amount of disaster that leads to, it can hardly be measured.
Indeed, and it's just, I mean, and not only that, but the guilt by association that goes with, if for some reason you have a medical reason to use contraceptives, the church can make you feel such a tremendous shame for taking care of your own health in this particular area. Again, it's the height of hypocrisy.
All right, we've been speaking with Denis Campbell. Please check out Denis Campbell on YouTube, youtube.com/worldview show. What's coming up, Denis?
Well, we've had a busy week in the airline industry, but next week we've got some very interesting folks coming on the program as well. We've got Juliana Forlana, which is Absurdity Today. She's going to be on our program, as well as the woman who writes the Hill Navigator column about when Democrats and Republicans start having relationships with each other on Capitol Hill, particularly their staffs. So that should be quite fun.
All right, youtube.com/worldview show. Subscribe free. Make sure not to miss any of the videos. Denis, we'll talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it. See you next week.